She believed she would wed a disabled billionaire. But on wedding night, everything changed. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The morning sky over San Francisco was pale gray, the kind that swallowed all color from the world. Inside a marble-floored chapel tucked behind an ivy-covered gate, Clara Hale stood still, clutching a bouquet of white lilies that trembled slightly in her hands. Her dress was elegant but borrowed, its lace sleeves a little too long, its hem brushing the polished floor. Around her, the air was heavy with silence. There was no music, no laughter, no crowd of friends. Only the low hum of the camera recording the quietest wedding anyone had ever seen. Across the aisle, Leonard Voss sat in a sleek black wheelchair, the man she was about to marry. At 35 years old, he was one of the youngest billionaires in California, the heir to Voss Industries. But after a terrible accident 2 years earlier, he had vanished from the public eye, rumored to have lost the use of his legs. The tabloids called him the man behind the glass tower, a ghost trapped inside his empire. Today, he looked every bit the legend's sharp suit, immaculate tie, steel gray eyes that never revealed emotion. He did not smile when he saw her. He simply nodded once, a gesture that was more command than greeting. Clara swallowed hard, reminding herself why she was here. Her little sister's hospital bills had reached a number she could no longer say out loud. When Voss's lawyer came with an offer to marry the billionaire for 1 year and receive the amount needed for her sister's surgery, she thought it was a cruel joke. But the desperation in her heart had left no room for pride. The officiant's voice echoed softly. "Do you, Clara Hale, take Leonard Voss as your lawfully wedded husband?" She forced herself to breathe. "I do." Then came his turn. "Do you, Leonard Voss, take Clara Hale to be your lawfully wedded wife?" His voice was calm, low, and unyielding. "I do." A faint click of the pen followed as both signed the papers, each stroke of ink sealing something far colder than a marriage. The sound of the wheelchair turning broke the silence. He looked at her once more, his tone firm yet distant. "You do not have to pretend, Miss Hale. This is not love. It is an arrangement." Her throat tightened, but she managed a quiet reply. "I know. I am not here for love." Outside, the first drops of rain tapped against the stained glass windows. The camera light went off. The chapel emptied, and in that heavy silence, Clara realized the strangest truth. This was the first wedding she had ever attended where no one had said congratulations. She took one last look at her husband, the man the world pitied, and wondered why his eyes did not look broken at all. The rain outside the chapel did not stop for hours. It whispered against the tall windows of the Voss estate, a modern mansion that overlooked the San Francisco Bay. The place was quiet, filled with soft lights and the faint hum of the sea wind. Clara Hale followed the butler down the marble corridor, her heels echoing in the silence. In her hands was a small envelope sealed with wax. Inside was the contract that had changed her life. Her husband had disappeared into his private wing right after the wedding. No good night, no glance back. Only his words lingered in the air. "This is not love. It is an arrangement." When the butler opened the double doors to the guest suite, she stepped in and stopped. The room was larger than her entire apartment. Cream-colored walls, tall bookshelves, and a view of the rain sweeping across the bay. A single suitcase sat by the bed, the only thing she owned now. The butler bowed politely before leaving. "Dinner is at 7. Mr. Voss eats alone." When the door closed, Clara let herself exhale. She placed the envelope on the nightstand and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the quiet world beyond the window. She could still hear her sister's laugh in her head, the way it used to fill their tiny kitchen back in Oakland. That memory was what had kept her strong through every meeting with the lawyers, every signature on the papers. The price of her sister's operation had been beyond anything she could earn in a lifetime. Leonard Voss's offer had been her only chance. A flashback came uninvited. The day his lawyer came to the hospital, the man had worn a black suit and a calm expression. "Mr. Voss wishes to extend a proposal," he had said. A legal marriage. 1 year. In return, your sister's treatment will be paid in full, and a trust fund will be created in your name. Clara had thought he was mocking her, but when the documents appeared, printed and notarized, reality settled like ice in her veins. She remembered reading the fine print late into the night, under the dull hospital light. There were 3 rules. First, she was not allowed to enter her husband's private quarters without permission. Second, she was to maintain a public image of a devoted wife when necessary, yet keep distance in private. Third, and most painfully, she was forbidden to develop emotional attachment or express affection toward him. The last line had been written in bold. This is a contractual marriage, not a union of affection. She remembered gripping the pen tightly, whispering, "I am doing this for her." Then she signed. Now, sitting alone in that golden cage, Clara opened the envelope again. The contract still smelled faintly of ink and metal. Her name beside his looked unreal, like 2 worlds forced to share 1 page. She traced her fingertip over the signature, then closed it quickly when she heard footsteps outside. The butler returned, his expression polite but cool. "Mr. Voss will see you in the dining hall." The dining hall was vast and cold, a long oak table with only 2 places set. Leonard Voss sat at the far end, his wheelchair positioned near the fire. The flames cast a faint reflection in his silver-gray eyes. "Sit," he said simply. She obeyed, her movements careful. The meal was elaborate grilled salmon, asparagus, a glass of white wine, but the silence between them was louder than the rain. After several minutes, she spoke quietly. "Thank you for helping my sister." He looked up for the first time, his expression unreadable. "Do not thank me. You signed a deal, and I fulfilled my part." The words cut, but she nodded. "Then I will keep my part as well." "Good," he replied. "You will attend the charity gala next month. You will play the role of my wife for the cameras. After that, you may stay out of sight. You will have your own staff, your own schedule. I do not interfere, and I expect the same courtesy." Clara's hands tightened around her napkin. "Understood." For a moment, he studied her, as if searching for defiance, but all he saw was quiet resolve. "You are different from what I expected," he said finally. "What did you expect?" she asked softly. "Someone who would try to use me," he answered, voice low. "Not someone who looks like she has already lost everything." She looked down at her plate, unable to reply. The fire cracked softly, and in that flicker of orange light, she saw not arrogance in him, but exhaustion, like a man fighting ghosts no one else could see. When dinner ended, he wheeled himself toward the door. "One more thing," he said, without turning. "If you ever need something, ask the staff. Do not come to me directly." Oh. Then he was gone, leaving behind the echo of wheels on marble and the faint scent of cedar. Later that night, Clara stood on the balcony outside her room. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of salt and iron. Below, the lights of the city shimmered across the bay, like broken glass. She held the envelope close to her chest. Somewhere in the mansion, she could hear the faint creak of a wheelchair moving across the floor. It was steady, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. For the first time since the wedding, she wondered what kind of man built an empire only to lock himself away from it. And for the first time, she was afraid that the contract she had signed was not the only thing binding her to Leonard Voss. Something far quieter had already begun, something that no signature could erase. The morning light slipped through the tall windows of the Voss mansion, spreading across the marble floors like soft gold. Clara woke early, still not used to the silence of this place. No traffic, no voices, only the gentle sound of the ocean far beyond the cliffs. The air smelled faintly of rain and salt. She sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the thin robe around her shoulders, wondering what she was supposed to do in a house that already had everything. It had been 3 days since the wedding. Leonard Voss had barely spoken to her since that first dinner. He stayed in his private office or in the West Wing, where she was told never to enter. The staff treated her politely, but with distance. Every movement seemed rehearsed, as if the entire house operated by invisible rules that she had yet to learn. At breakfast, the butler brought her tea and a plate of fruit arranged too perfectly to eat. "Will Mr. Voss be joining?" she asked. "No, Mrs. Voss," he said, his tone gentle but detached. "Mr. Voss prefers to have his meals in his study." Mrs. Voss. The word sounded strange, like a title that belonged to someone else. After breakfast, Clara walked through the halls, letting her fingertips brush against the cold glass and metal that filled the house. Every room felt like a museum, clean, organized, but soulless. She stopped in front of a painting near the staircase. It showed a boy and a young man standing beside an older gentleman, all dressed in suits. At the bottom corner, the signature read Leonard Voss, 1989. She had seen that name before, Leonard's father, the founder of Voss Industries. She looked at the boy in the painting. He could not have been older than 12, with light brown hair and a mischievous smile. The older one beside him looked serious, his hand resting protectively on the boy's shoulder. Clara stared at their faces, realizing who they must have been: Leonard and his younger brother. The memory of the accident reports came rushing back. 2 years ago, a car crash had killed one passenger and left the other in critical condition. The survivor had been Leonard. The sound of wheels on marble startled her. She turned and saw him at the end of the hall, the morning light glinting off the rims of his wheelchair. His expression was calm but unreadable. "You are awake early," he said. "I could not sleep," she replied quietly. "This house feels too quiet." He studied her for a moment, then rolled closer. "You will get used to it." "Oh," she hesitated before speaking again. "I saw the painting. Your family." His eyes flickered to the wall. "You should not believe everything a painting shows. That picture was taken before people started pretending." She wanted to ask more, but his tone warned her not to. Instead, she said softly, "I am sorry about your brother." The chair stopped. His jaw tightened. "Do not offer sympathy, you do not understand." Her breath caught. "I did not mean to." He cut her off gently but firmly. "Do not speak of him again." The silence that followed felt heavier than stone. Then he turned his chair and wheeled away, leaving her alone with the echo of her own heartbeat. Later that day, she went to the garden at the back of the estate. It was vast, overlooking the bay, with rose bushes lined in perfect rows. The air smelled of wet soil and sea air. She picked a fallen petal from the ground, remembering her sister again, how the girl had loved drawing flowers, even from her hospital bed. Clara closed her eyes and whispered, "I will get you better. I promise." She did not hear the sound of the chair until it was close. Leonard had followed, stopping a few feet behind her. For a moment, he said nothing. The wind moved through the roses, soft and cold. "Why are you out here?" he asked finally. "I needed to breathe," she said. "The house feels like a cage sometimes." He looked at her for a long time. "You think you are trapped, Mrs. Voss? You are free to leave whenever you wish. The door is not locked." Her voice was steady but low. "Freedom does not mean much when you owe someone everything." Something flickered in his eyes, pain perhaps, or guilt, but he masked it quickly. "You should not see it that way. You were given a choice." She smiled faintly, though it did not reach her eyes. "Yes, I chose survival." He did not answer. Instead, he turned his chair slightly and looked toward the ocean. "You remind me of someone," he said after a while. "Someone who used to believe survival was enough." She looked at him curiously, but he did not continue. The breeze lifted the edge of his sleeve, revealing the faint scars along his wrist, thin lines of healed pain that told their own story. He noticed her gaze and pulled the sleeve down. As the sun lowered over the bay, he finally spoke again, his voice softer. "Dinner will be at 7. You may join if you wish." Then he rolled away, leaving her among the roses. That night, Clara stood at her window again, watching the lights of the city blink in the distance. She thought about his scars, his silence, the way his eyes had changed when she mentioned his brother. Somewhere behind all that distance was a man still breathing, still hurting. In the quiet of that mansion, Clara made herself a silent promise. She would not leave until she understood the truth about Leonard Voss, the man who had bought her freedom, and maybe, without meaning to, stolen her peace. The next evening arrived wrapped in fog. The Voss mansion stood quiet against the dim gray sky, its tall windows reflecting the faint glow of the ocean lights. Clara Hale dressed carefully for dinner, not because she wanted to impress her husband, but because it was easier to hide uncertainty behind small routines. She tied her hair into a low knot, wore a soft blue dress from the closet that had been filled for her, and slipped on a thin silver bracelet she had owned since college. It was the only piece of her old life she still carried. When she entered the dining room, Leonard was already there. He sat near the fireplace again, dressed in a dark suit, a book closed on the table beside his untouched plate. The flames painted his face in shades of amber and shadow. "You are punctual," he said, his tone flat but not unfriendly. "You asked me to join," she replied, sitting down across from him. "I thought it would be rude to ignore that." He nodded slightly. Politeness is a rare thing these days. For a while, they ate in silence. The rain had stopped, but the sound of waves outside filled the empty spaces between them. The meal was quiet until she noticed his hand trembling slightly as he reached for his glass. The motion was small, but her eyes caught it. "Are you in pain?" she asked gently. He paused, set the glass down, and looked at her. "I am fine." "You do not look fine," she said softly. His gaze hardened. "You are not my nurse, Mrs. Voss." Her cheeks warmed, but she did not look away. "I did not mean to offend you." "You did not," he said after a moment. "You only reminded me of something I prefer to forget." He reached for the book beside him and turned it in his hands. The cover was worn leather, the title faintly visible, The Art of War. He opened it, then closed it again without reading. "People like to think pain teaches lessons," he continued quietly. "They are wrong. It only teaches distance." Clara listened, unsure what to say. "Distance can protect," she offered. "Or destroy," he countered. The clock above the fireplace ticked slowly. She could feel the air between them shifting. Not warmer yet, but less cold. After dinner she stood to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Clara." It was the first time he had spoken her name. She turned. "Yes?" He hesitated before saying, "There is something I need you to sign." He wheeled toward a drawer in the cabinet and took out a folder. Inside was a document printed neatly with several lines for initials and signatures. She recognized the same precise typeface as the marriage contract. "What is this?" she asked. "A confidentiality agreement," he said simply. "It protects both of us. There are reporters who would pay well for a story about a billionaire's private life." Her chest tightened, but she took the pen. "You think I would sell your story?" "I think desperation changes people," he said. "It changed me once." She stared at the paper, then signed without reading the rest. "If this makes you feel safe, then it is worth it." He looked at her for a moment, his jaw tense. "You do not even know what you agreed to." She met his gaze. "Trust is not written in paper, Mr. Voss. You should know that better than anyone." For the first time, something almost like surprise crossed his face. He took the document back slowly, then placed it aside. "You are not like the others," he said. "Others?" she asked. "The ones who smiled too much and listened too little." Clara said nothing. Instead, she walked to the window. The fog had thickened, covering the garden and the sea. "It feels like the whole world is sleeping out there," she whispered. Leonard turned his chair slightly, his reflection faint in the glass. "It feels that way most nights." She looked at him in the window's reflection. "Do you ever sleep?" He smiled faintly, a ghost of expression. "Only when I forget I am supposed to." The butler entered quietly then, reminding them of the late hour. Leonard dismissed him with a nod. When they were alone again, he said, "You can explore the East Garden tomorrow. It is quieter there." "Thank you," she said. "Do not thank me," he replied. "It is not a gift, only permission." Still, his voice had lost some of its sharpness. As she left the room, she glanced back once. The firelight caught his face in half shadow, and for the first time, she saw something fragile beneath his control, loneliness, maybe, or regret. That night, Clara walked the halls of the mansion alone. The portraits of the Voss family lined the walls, their painted eyes following her in silence. When she reached the landing above the main staircase, she paused. Down below, Leonard moved across the grand foyer, his chair gliding silently over the marble. But then, something made her heart stop. He paused near the window, stood slowly, and took a single step forward without the chair. His hand braced against the frame, his shoulders tense with effort. It lasted only a few seconds before he sat back down again. Clara stood frozen in the shadows, her breath caught in disbelief. He could stand. She said nothing. She turned quietly and returned to her room, her mind spinning. The image of him standing burned in her thoughts like a secret flame. For the first time since signing the contract, She realized that the man she had married might be hiding far more than his heart. Morning came softly over the cliffs, gray light washing the marble walls of the Voss mansion. Clara Hale had not slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the image again, Leonard Voss standing by the window, alone, silent, and unobserved. It had not been a trick of light or imagination. He had stood. He had taken a step. The man she had married, the man the world pitied, was not as broken as he claimed to be. She sat by the edge of the bed, her thoughts tangled between anger and confusion. Why would he pretend? Why choose to live behind the illusion of weakness? The contract suddenly felt heavier than ever, its words echoing in her mind. You will not enter his private quarters. You will not ask questions beyond your role. When she walked into the hallway, the house was already alive with quiet movement. The staff greeted her politely, but there was something colder in their eyes today, as if they sensed she knew something she should not. She made her way toward the library, hoping to distract her mind with books, but paused near the grand staircase. Down below, Leonard was speaking with the head butler, his tone calm and measured. Yes, schedule the meeting for Thursday, he said, and make sure the board receives the revised figures. Oh. His voice carried a weight of command, precise and steady. There was no trace of the weakness he showed when he was near her. When the butler left, Leonard looked up and caught sight of her standing on the landing. You are awake early again, he said. I could say the same to you, she replied. He smiled faintly, a controlled gesture. Old habits. I work better before the city wakes. Clara hesitated, searching his face. Do you ever rest? I rest when the world stops expecting things from me, he said quietly. That has not happened in a long time. He wheeled toward his office before she could respond. She watched him go, her chest tight with questions she could not ask. Later that afternoon, Clara explored the east garden as he had suggested. The path wound through tall hedges and marble statues, leading to a small greenhouse tucked behind a stone archway. Inside, the air was warm and humid, filled with the scent of soil and lemon leaves. A woman in her 50s, dressed in gardener's attire, looked up from her work. Mrs. Voss, the woman said with a kind smile. You must be the new lady of the house. I am Maria. I take care of the plants. Clara smiled softly. They are beautiful. Mr. Voss used to help me, Maria said. Before the accident, he spent hours here every weekend. He said the plants never asked him for anything. Oh. Clara looked around, her eyes landing on a small wooden bench near the center. He told me he could not walk, she said without meaning to. Maria hesitated, her hands pausing over the pot she was filling. Accidents change people, she said carefully. Not always the way others expect. That evening, Clara returned to the mansion as the sun sank over the water. The walls glowed with soft gold, but the house itself still felt lifeless. Dinner was served in silence again. Leonard sat at his end of the table, his expression distant. She kept thinking about Maria's words. Accidents change people. Halfway through the meal, she gathered her courage. I went to the greenhouse today. He looked up slowly. Did you like it? I did, she said. Maria told me you used to spend time there. His fork paused midair. That was a long time ago. Do you miss it? He set the utensil down, his gaze sharp. You seem curious about things that are not your concern. I am sorry, she said quickly, though her voice trembled with frustration. It is only that you told me to explore the garden, and I thought, I did not tell you to question my past, he interrupted. The words stung. She lowered her eyes. I understand. The rest of dinner passed in silence, broken only by the ticking of the clock and the faint hiss of the fire. When she stood to leave, he spoke again, softer this time. Clara. She turned, waiting. There are things you do not know, he said, his tone low. If you wish to stay sane in this house, learn to stop searching for them. Her heart pounded, but she nodded. I will try. He watched her go, the tension in his shoulders visible even in the dim light. That night, Clara sat by her window once more, watching the fog roll across the bay. She thought of her sister's laughter, of the bills still unpaid, and of the man down the hall who could stand but chose not to. The mansion felt less like a home, and more like a secret with walls. From somewhere in the west wing came the faint sound of a piano. Slow, hesitant notes, played by someone testing memory rather than skill. She followed the melody down the corridor, barefoot, careful not to make a sound. Through the half-open door of the music room, she saw Leonard at the piano. His hands moved over the keys with practiced grace, his back straight, his legs motionless. But when the music swelled, he rose halfway from the chair, his hand gripping the edge of the piano for balance. For a brief second, his full height returned tall, steady, alive. Then the music stopped. He sank back into the wheelchair, his face pale but calm. Clara stood in the hallway, unseen. Her heart ached with a strange mix of relief and sorrow. He was not the man the world thought he was. But whatever he was hiding had carved deep wounds that even wealth could not heal. When she returned to her room, the night air felt colder. The mansion around her was silent again, except for the echo of a single question she could not silence. If Leonard Voss could stand, why did he choose to live as if he could not? The following week arrived with colder mornings and skies that never seemed to brighten. Clara Hale had learned the rhythm of the Voss mansion, the stillness of its halls, the quiet steps of the servants, and the sound of Leonard's wheelchair echoing softly against the marble floors. Yet since the night she had seen him stand, that rhythm no longer felt real. Every creak of the house reminded her of the secret she now carried. She had tried to convince herself it was not her place to interfere. Whatever reason Leonard Voss had for pretending, it was buried deep within him. But curiosity had begun to feel like gravity. It pulled her closer no matter how hard she resisted. That morning, she went to the kitchen to ask for coffee. The cook, a woman named Helen, gave her a polite smile. "You are up early again, Mrs. Voss." Mr. Voss already took his breakfast in his study. Clara hesitated, then asked carefully, "Does he ever eat with the staff?" Helen looked surprised. "No, ma'am. Mr. Voss keeps to himself. Always has, even before the accident." Before the accident, those words again. Everyone spoke of it like a wound the house still carried. Clara thanked her and took her coffee to the terrace overlooking the garden. The sea stretched gray and endless beyond the cliffs, and the air smelled of rain. Hours later, while exploring the long corridor that led toward Leonard's office, she heard a crash, a heavy sound, followed by a sharp thud. Without thinking, she ran toward it. The door to his study was half open. "Mr. Voss?" she called. Inside, she found him on the floor beside the wheelchair, papers scattered across the rug. His breathing was shallow, one hand gripping the edge of the desk for support. For a second, their eyes met surprise in his, panic in hers. "Do not come closer," he said through clenched teeth. But she ignored him. "You are hurt." "I said, stay back." His voice rose, firm, desperate. She knelt beside him anyway, sliding an arm around his shoulder. "You cannot get up alone. Let me help you." He turned his face away, ashamed. "I do not need your pity." "It is not pity," she said quietly. "It is decency." He tried to push her away, but his strength faltered. She steadied him, lifting him slowly until he could sit against the desk. He was heavier than she expected, the muscles in his arms strong despite the months he had spent in that chair. When he caught his breath, he looked at her with an expression she had never seen before, half anger, half gratitude. "You should not have come in," he said. "You should not be on the floor," she replied. For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain began tapping softly against the windows, filling the silence between them. Then he sighed and reached for the chair. She helped him back into it, her hands trembling slightly. When he was settled, he looked at her again. "You saw too much." "I saw a man fall," she said. "That is all." His lips curved into something between a smile and a grimace. "You are a terrible liar." She met his gaze, her voice firm. "Then you should know you are not the only one." He stared at her, then looked away. "Why did you not tell anyone?" "Because it is not my secret to tell." The words hung in the air like a fragile thread. Something softened in his eyes. "You surprise me, Mrs. Voss. Most people would have sold that truth for a headline." "I did not marry you for headlines," she said quietly. He laughed once, a hollow sound. "No, you married me for money." Her face tightened. "You made sure I had no other choice." That ended the conversation. He turned his chair toward the window, staring out at the fog. She gathered the fallen papers, placing them neatly on the desk. Her fingers brushed against an old photograph, Leonard standing beside another man, younger, smiling, his brother. She hesitated, then set it face down. "You should rest," she said softly. "Rest is not something I earn," he murmured without looking at her. When she left the study, her heart was still racing. The image of him on the floor, struggling to hide his strength and his pain, would not leave her. She could feel the storm building beneath his calm exterior, a man trapped not by injury, but by guilt. That night, as she prepared for bed, she found a small tray outside her door. On it rested a porcelain teacup filled with chamomile tea and a note written in neat, slanted handwriting. "For the headache. I appreciate your silence. L.V." Clara stared at the note for a long moment. It was the first time he had acknowledged her kindness in writing. She set the cup on the windowsill and watched the lights of the city flicker across the bay. Down the hall, she heard the faint hum of the wheelchair moving again, slow and steady. Yet in her mind, she saw him standing, his hand braced against the desk, his face set with determination. For the first time, she realized she was no longer angry. She was afraid for him, afraid of what could drive a man to hide behind his own weakness, and of what it would cost both of them when that truth finally came to light. The rain began again before midnight, and as she drifted to sleep, the echo of his voice lingered in her thoughts. "I do not need your pity." But she knew that was not true. What Leonard Voss needed was forgiveness, something he had long stopped believing he deserved. The following mornings unfolded slowly, one after another, until the storm finally passed. The mansion looked different beneath sunlight, softer somehow, less like a fortress and more like a place that might remember warmth. Clara Hale began noticing the small details she had ignored before: the way the sea breeze carried the scent of salt through the open hallways, the quiet murmur of staff who spoke in low tones when they thought she was not listening, and the faint trace of piano music that sometimes drifted from the West Wing long after midnight. After the fall in his study, Leonard Voss had changed slightly. He did not thank her for helping him that day, not aloud, but he stopped avoiding her. At breakfast, he would nod in acknowledgement. At dinner, he would sometimes ask simple questions, nothing personal, just polite curiosity about her reading, her walks, her sister's health. They were small gestures, but in a house where silence ruled, they felt like cracks in a long closed door. One morning, Clara found a new ritual waiting for her. Outside her room, beside the teacup he had once left, there was now a second cup. Each morning after that, one would always be there, one for her, one for him, both untouched until she came downstairs. She never asked who brought them or why, but she knew it was his way of speaking without words. By the end of that week, Clara decided to return the gesture. She began leaving a cup of tea on the small table near the window of the library, where Leonard often sat to read late at night. She never saw him take it, but every morning the cup was empty. It became their quiet exchange, unspoken, steady, and strangely intimate. One evening, while arranging the flowers in the foyer, she heard his voice behind her. "You have changed this place." She turned, startled, the scissors still in her hand. "I was only trying to make it less empty." Leonard looked at the fresh lilies she had placed by the staircase. "They were my mother's favorite," he said softly. "I did not know," she replied. He moved his chair closer, stopping beside the table. "You would not have. Most people here prefer to forget she existed." Clara hesitated before asking, "Why would anyone want to forget?" His gaze dropped to the floor. "Because remembering her means, remembering the day she died." The air between them stilled. He did not speak for a long time. Then his voice came again, quieter. "It was the same day as the accident, the one that took my brother." Her breath caught, but she said nothing. His hands rested on the wheels of his chair, unmoving. "I was the one driving," he said at last. "I walked away with my life, but I lost both of them. The doctors told me my legs might never recover. I let them believe it was permanent. I let everyone believe it, because standing again felt like betrayal." Clara stood frozen. The confession fell into the silence like a stone sinking through water. When he finally looked at her, his eyes were steady. "Now you know why I stay in this chair." Her voice trembled. "You punish yourself." I live honestly," he said. She shook her head. "There is nothing honest about living half a life." He smiled faintly, but it was a broken smile. "You are braver than you think, Mrs. Voss. Most people run from guilt. You face it. I do not have your kind of guilt, she replied. He studied her for a moment. No, you just have debt. That is a quieter kind of cage. The words stung, but she did not argue. Instead, she stepped closer and replaced the wilted flowers on the table. Maybe cages can still hold beauty, she said. His expression softened. Perhaps. But beauty rarely lasts in this house. That night, she could not sleep. His words replayed in her mind, looping through the rhythm of the rain outside. She thought of the man she had married, a man who could stand, but chose not to. A man who could forgive anyone except himself. At dawn, she carried a fresh cup of tea to the library window as she had done each morning. But this time, she left something else beside it, a small folded napkin with a single sentence written in careful handwriting. Forgiveness is not betrayal. When she returned later that afternoon, the cup was empty and the napkin was gone. Nothing was said, yet she knew he had read it. That evening, the butler approached her quietly while she was reading near the fireplace. "Mr. Voss wishes to dine with you in the garden," he said. "If that is acceptable." No. It was the first invitation she had received that did not sound like an order. The garden was lit by lanterns that glowed softly beneath the twilight. The ocean stretched below the cliffs, turning silver under the fading Sunday. Leonard waited by a small iron table, his chair turned toward the sea. When she approached, he gestured to the seat beside him. "You chose a beautiful place," she said. "It was not my idea," he admitted. "Maria insisted the air would do me good." The meal was simple grilled vegetables, bread, and tea. The kind of dinner that felt less like a performance and more like peace. "I have thought about your note," he said after a while. "You wrote that forgiveness is not betrayal." "Yes," she said softly. "I meant it." He looked out at the horizon. "Perhaps you are right, but forgiveness feels like standing in front of what I destroyed and pretending it never happened. Forgiveness does not erase," she said. "It lets you breathe again." He turned to her then, and for the first time since their wedding, there was warmth in his eyes. "And what if I do not deserve to breathe again?" She held his gaze, her voice steady. "Then breathe anyway. The world will decide the rest." The night settled around them, filled with the sound of waves and wind. Neither spoke again, but for the first time, silence did not feel like distance. It felt like understanding. When Clara returned to her room later, she found another note waiting on her nightstand. In the same precise handwriting, it said only one line: "Thank you for not walking away." The morning of the charity gala arrived with the sound of waves striking the cliffs and gulls calling over the bay. The mansion was alive in a way Clara Hale had never seen before. Florists filled the entry hall with white roses, tailors carried boxes of suits and gowns, and photographers walked through the corridors to check lighting for the evening event. Every footstep echoed with tension and purpose. The Voss Foundation's annual charity gala was the only public appearance Leonard Voss still attended each year. It raised money for the hospital his late mother had once supported, and for the press, it was proof that the reclusive billionaire still existed. For Clara, it would be the first time the world saw her at his side. Maria found her in the dressing room near the main staircase, helping her adjust the gown chosen by Leonard's assistant. The silk fabric shimmered faintly under the light, a deep shade of blue that reminded her of the ocean before a storm. "You look beautiful, Mrs. Voss," Maria said kindly. "They will talk about you all night." "I do not want them to talk," Clara admitted. "I only want to get through the night without embarrassing him." Maria smiled gently. "If he invited you to stand beside him, it means he wants you there." But Clara was not so sure. She still remembered his warning weeks earlier. "You will play the role of my wife for the cameras." It had sounded more like a duty than an invitation. By sunset, the mansion had transformed into a place of glittering light and polished marble. Guests arrived in limousines that lined the driveway like a parade of wealth. Clara waited at the top of the grand staircase, her heart pounding. When Leonard appeared, dressed in a black suit with his tie perfectly knotted, the room seemed to pause. He moved with quiet confidence, guiding his wheelchair through the crowd with ease. When his eyes met hers, something unreadable passed between them. Recognition, maybe gratitude, maybe warning. "You look presentable," he said softly, though there was the faintest hint of humor behind the words. "And you look less intimidating than usual," she replied, allowing a small smile. His lips curved slightly, and for a moment, the distance between them felt less impossible. They entered the ballroom together as the music swelled. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and a sea of faces turned toward them. Clara felt every gaze burn against her skin, but Leonard remained composed, answering questions with the calm assurance of a man who had spent his life commanding attention. "Mr. Voss, it is good to see you after such a long absence," one journalist said. "And your wife, she is stunning. How long have you two been married?" Leonard did not hesitate. "Nearly 1 year," he said smoothly. "She prefers a quiet life, and I prefer to respect it." The cameras clicked again. Clara forced a graceful smile, nodding slightly. She could feel the tension in his posture, the way his hand gripped the wheel a little tighter each time someone mentioned the accident or his health. During dinner, they sat at the head table surrounded by board members and donors. The chandeliers glowed above them, casting gold across the room. When a guest leaned toward Clara and asked how it felt to live in such luxury, she answered simply, "Comfort means little when it is built from someone else's pain." The table went quiet for a moment, and then Leonard spoke, his tone controlled but respectful. "My wife has a way of reminding me that fortune is not a reward, it is a responsibility." There was a murmur of approval. Clara looked at him in surprise, and for the first time, he met her gaze without retreat. When the speeches began, Leonard wheeled forward to address the crowd. His voice carried through the hall, calm and resonant. "We stand here tonight not because of what we have, but because of what we can give," he said. "My mother believed compassion was the only true currency. I hope we never forget that." As he spoke, Clara watched the audience. They saw a man of strength, not a patient in recovery. They saw leadership, not fragility. But she knew what they did, not that beneath his control was a man still learning to forgive himself. After the applause, Leonard returned to her side. "You handled them well," he said quietly. "I only said what I believed," she replied. "That is what makes it dangerous," he said, though there was no anger in his voice. "People listen to truth more than to charm." Later that evening, when most guests had drifted toward the terrace, a young reporter cornered Clara near the fountain. "Mrs. Voss, there are rumors that your marriage was arranged," she said. "Some say it was for business, others think it was for sympathy. Which is it?" Clara felt her chest tighten. Before she could answer, Leonard's voice came from behind her. "Neither," he said calmly. "It was for choice. Mine." The reporter flushed, muttered an apology, and hurried away. Leonard turned to Clara, his expression unreadable. "Do not let them corner you. They feed on discomfort." "You did not have to defend me," she said softly. "Yes," he replied. "I did." "Oh." As the night drew to a close, the guests began leaving in waves of glittering dresses and polished shoes. The ballroom grew quiet again, filled only with the rustle of roses and the fading notes of the string quartet. When the last of the photographers departed, Leonard turned his chair toward the balcony doors. "You may breathe again," he said lightly. Clara followed him outside. The moon hung low over the ocean, and the wind carried the scent of salt and rain. "You were remarkable tonight," she said. He glanced at her, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "You were not so bad yourself." For a long moment neither of them spoke. The waves rolled against the cliffs below, steady and endless. And though their marriage had begun as a contract, for the first time, Clara felt as though they were standing side by side, not as strangers bound by paper, but as two souls who had both survived, something they could not yet name. When she finally turned to leave, Leonard said quietly, "Clara, thank you for making them see me again." She looked back at him, her voice calm and sure. "You did that yourself." The night breeze caught her hair as she walked back inside. And for the first time, Leonard Voss let himself watch her without pretending not to care. The morning after the gala arrived quiet and gray, as if the ocean itself had fallen asleep beneath the fog. Clara Hale woke with the faint ache of exhaustion that follows long hours of pretending. She replayed the night in her mind, the lights, the cameras, the false smiles, and the one genuine moment when Leonard Voss had looked at her as if he truly saw her. It had been only a few seconds, yet something inside her had shifted. The mansion was unusually still. No footsteps echoed in the corridors. No voices whispered from the staff. She found breakfast waiting for her in the dining room, untouched and cooling. The butler bowed as she entered. "Mr. Voss has gone into the city," he said. "A meeting with the board." Clara nodded, though her stomach tightened at the thought. The world had seen him strong again, commanding, confident, capable. Perhaps that taste of power had drawn him back into the world he once abandoned. She tried not to read meaning into it, but her chest felt heavy all the same. After breakfast, she walked toward the garden. The roses had begun to wilt from the recent rain, their petals curling at the edges. She knelt to trim them, remembering how Leonard's mother had loved these flowers. A small act of care, she thought, for a family that seemed to have forgotten how to heal. By mid-afternoon, the sound of tires on gravel echoed through the courtyard. She looked up from the garden path to see Leonard's car pull into the drive. He was not alone. A man stepped out of the passenger seat, a tall figure in a tailored coat, dark-haired and confident. His smile was easy, too polished, the kind that carried hidden intentions. Leonard introduced him briefly when they entered the hall. "Clara, this is Edward Voss, my cousin. He is visiting from Los Angeles." Edward extended his hand, his gaze sharp behind the charm. "Mrs. Voss, I have heard so much about you." Clara shook his hand politely. "Only good things, I hope." "Die." "Of course," he said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Leonard speaks very highly of you." But Leonard's expression said otherwise. His tone was calm, but his eyes remained guarded. "Edward is here to discuss some business matters. Nothing for you to worry about." That evening, the three of them shared dinner in the main hall. The air felt colder than usual, the tension thick enough to touch. Edward carried most of the conversation stories about investors, properties, and how the press had been fascinated by Leonard's sudden return to public life. "They think you are making a comeback," Edward said with a smirk. "The newspapers called last night the resurrection of Voss Industries." Leonard's expression stayed neutral. "Let them write what they want." Edward leaned back in his chair. "You should use it, cousin. Appearances change markets, especially when you have a wife who photographs as well as Mrs. Voss." Clara nearly dropped her fork. "Excuse me?" He smiled as though it were a compliment. "It is a good thing. Public image matters." Leonard's voice turned sharp. "Enough, Edward." Edward raised his hands in mock surrender. "Relax, cousin. I meant no harm." But the glint in his eyes said otherwise. When dinner ended, Leonard excused himself first, leaving Clara and Edward in the candlelit hall. Edward poured himself a glass of wine and turned toward her with a look that felt almost rehearsed. "You must have a fascinating life here," he said. "This house, the view, the husband. Not many women would trade freedom for such quiet luxury." Clara met his gaze steadily. "It was not luxury I wanted." He tilted his head. "Then what was it?" "Peace," she said simply. "Though I am still learning if it can exist here." Edward smiled, though there was a trace of mockery in his voice. "You are honest. I like that." He set the glass down and stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Be careful, Mrs. Voss. The truth has a way of making enemies in this family." Before she could respond, Leonard's voice came from the doorway. "Is my cousin boring you already?" Edward turned smoothly, unbothered, just welcoming her properly. Leonard's expression darkened. "Your kind of welcome is rarely proper." Clara stood, sensing the growing tension. "I think I will go upstairs." Leonard nodded. "That is a good idea." When she left the room, she could still hear their voices, echoing behind her, quiet, controlled, dangerous. Later that night, she stood by her window, watching the fog creep up from the sea. Down below, two silhouettes crossed the courtyard, Leonard and Edward, still talking. Their words were too faint to hear, but their gestures told enough. Leonard's posture was rigid, while Edward's movements were loose, careless, like a man testing boundaries. The next morning, the mansion's calm felt forced. Staff whispered as they passed, their eyes darting toward closed doors. Clara asked Maria quietly, "Is something wrong?" Maria hesitated before answering. "Mr. Edward brings storms with him, Mrs. Voss. Always has." That evening, Leonard joined Clara in the library. He looked tired, his voice quieter than usual. "Edward will be staying for a few days," he said. "I want you to avoid him as much as possible." She frowned. "Why? He is family." He is also dangerous," Leonard said. "He wants what he cannot earn, and that makes him unpredictable." Clara studied him for a moment, seeing the shadow of old pain behind his composure. "And what does he want from you?" Leonard's jaw tightened. "Everything that is left." He turned his chair toward the window, the light from the fire outlining the edges of his face. "If he ever approaches you when I am not around, walk away," he said quietly. Clara nodded, her voice steady. "I understand." As she left the library, she caught her reflection in the glass, the face of a woman who had entered this mansion out of desperation, now caught in a world of secrets she barely understood. Behind her, Leonard stared into the dark beyond the window, his thoughts heavy. The ghosts of his past had returned, and this time, they carried his last name. The following days passed beneath a fragile calm, like the quiet before an approaching storm. Edward Voss remained in the mansion, moving through the halls as if he owned them. His presence unsettled everyone. The staff spoke in whispers. Maria kept to the garden, and even the butler moved more quickly, as though he wished to disappear from sight. Clara Hale could feel tension in the very air, thick as mist rolling in from the sea. Leonard grew quieter too. He spent long hours in his study. Papers spread across the desk. Phone calls whispered behind closed doors. When he did emerge, he carried a look that mixed fatigue and vigilance, the expression of a man who knew danger but refused to show fear. One morning, as Clara was arranging lilies in the foyer, Edward approached her with a too-easy smile. "It seems my cousin has you decorating every corner of this place," he said. "Are you trying to make it feel alive again?" "I only try to make it less lonely," she replied, keeping her tone even. He chuckled softly. "You must be quite patient. Leonard is not the easiest man to live with." She looked up. "He is more complicated than most people know." Edward leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Oh, I know him better than anyone. That is why I do not trust him." Clara frowned. "Family should not speak that way." "Family," Edward said with a faint sneer, "is just another kind of contract. The difference is that you cannot sign your way out of it." Before she could answer, Leonard's voice echoed from the staircase. "Edward, I believe you have already overstayed your welcome." Edward turned, his expression shifting into a practiced smile. "I was only talking with your charming wife." Leonard's gaze hardened. "Then find another topic. This one is off limits." The cousins faced each other in silence. The resemblance between them was faint but visible. Same height. Same sharp jawline. But where Leonard's restraint gave him gravity, Edward's arrogance made him reckless. That night, the mansion felt colder. Clara read by the fireplace in the library, though her eyes moved over the same page again and again. When Leonard entered, she looked up. He was holding a file, his expression distant. "You should not speak with Edward," he said. "I did not seek him out," she replied. "He came to me." Leonard sighed. "He always does. He looks for weakness, then turns it into opportunity." Clara set her book aside. "He said you cannot be trusted." Leonard's jaw tightened. "Of course he did. He has been waiting for years to say that to someone who would listen." "Why does he hate you?" she asked softly. Leonard looked toward the fire, his eyes shadowed. "Because my father left everything to me. Because I was supposed to protect the company, and I almost destroyed it." He paused, the crackle of the fire filling the silence. "When the accident happened, Edward was the first to call the lawyers. He expected me to die. When I did not, he began preparing for the day he could still take what remained." Clara studied him. "You think he came here for business?" "I know he did," Leonard said. "But business is never only about money. It is about power, and power has always been his favorite game." He leaned back, exhaustion visible in the set of his shoulders. For a long time, neither spoke. Then he said quietly, "You should stay away from the West Wing. He has a room there. I do not want him near you." "Huh. I can take care of myself," she said gently. "I do not doubt that," he replied. "But there are things about him you do not know." His voice faltered slightly, as though something unspoken pressed against his restraint. Then he turned his chair toward the window. "Good night, Clara." She watched him leave, her thoughts heavy with questions she could not ask. 2 days later, the calm cracked. Clara was in the garden trimming wilted roses when she heard raised voices coming from the terrace. She froze. The sound of glass breaking followed. When she hurried toward the noise, she saw Leonard and Edward facing each other by the stone railing. "You have no right to decide for the board," Edward shouted. "You are not the only Voss left." Leonard's tone was low but steady. "You lost that right the day you forged contracts behind my back." Edward's smile was sharp. "You think anyone will believe you?" You are still hiding behind that chair, playing the broken hero. Clara stood at a distance, afraid to move. Leonard's voice hardened. Be careful, Edward. You are not as clever as you think. Edward leaned closer. And you are not as healed as you pretend to be. Then he turned and walked away, leaving shards of glass glittering on the terrace floor. That evening, Leonard did not come to dinner. The butler informed Clara that he had locked himself in his study. Worried, she waited outside until she heard movement. When the door opened, his face was pale, his eyes dark with sleeplessness. He knows, Leonard said simply. Knows what? She asked. That I can walk, he replied. He must have seen me, or perhaps he always suspected. Clara's breath caught. What will he do? Leonard looked past her, toward the dim corridor stretching into the mansion's depths. What he always does. He will turn truth into a weapon. He wheeled himself back inside, the door closing softly behind him. Clara stood alone in the hall, the echo of his words following her into the silence. For the first time since coming to this house, she felt a tremor of real fear, not for herself, but for the man who had spent years punishing his own survival. Outside, the sea struck the cliffs with relentless rhythm, as if warning of a storm that neither of them could escape. A heavy silence settled over the Voss mansion in the days that followed. The servants moved quietly, speaking only when necessary. Even the wind that usually howled across the cliffs seemed to hush, as if the house itself was waiting. Clara Hale could feel the tension in every corner, the kind of quiet that comes before something breaks. Leonard Voss no longer came down for breakfast. He stayed locked in his study, speaking only to the butler or his attorney. Clara saw him only in passing, his face pale, his eyes ringed with sleeplessness. The warmth she had begun to see in him after the gala was gone, replaced by a look of distant calculation. Edward Voss, on the other hand, seemed to thrive on the unease. He wandered the halls freely, smiling as if he had already won some invisible game. His footsteps echoed in the marble corridors, the sound sharp and unsettling. One afternoon, Clara found herself alone in the library, trying to focus on a book she could not read. The door creaked open, and Edward stepped inside without invitation. You seem lonely, Mrs. Voss, he said lightly. I prefer it that way, she answered without looking up. He moved closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Leonard is losing control. You must see it. The board is restless. The press smells blood. He cannot keep hiding forever. She closed the book carefully and looked up at him. You sound like someone who has been waiting for that to happen. Edward smiled. Perhaps I have. Perhaps it is time someone else carried the family name properly. By tearing it apart? She asked. By saving it, he said smoothly. Leonard's obsession with guilt is destroying what our grandfather built. If you were wise, you would step aside before he drags you down with him. Clara's voice stayed calm. You underestimate him. Do I? Edward leaned closer, his tone turning sharp. Do you even know the man you married? Do you know what really happened that night of the accident? She froze. He told me enough. Enough to make you pity him, perhaps, Edward said. But not the truth. He was driving drunk. His brother begged him to slow down, and he refused. His mother died trying to protect them. That is why he hides behind the chair, because if he stood, he would have to face what he did. Oh, Clara's heart pounded, her hands trembling. You are lying, he smiled coldly. Believe what you like, but when this is over, remember that I tried to warn you. Before she could answer, Leonard's voice cut through the room. That is enough. Edward turned, startled. Leonard was at the doorway, his wheelchair motionless, his expression carved from stone. His voice was quiet, but the fury beneath it was unmistakable. Leave my wife alone. Edward raised his hands in mock surrender. Just having a chat. Leonard's gaze did not waver. Get out. For a moment, Edward held his cousin's eyes, then smiled thinly and walked away. The door closed behind him, leaving only silence and the faint ticking of the clock. Clara stood, unsure what to say. Leonard looked at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. He should not have told you that, he said finally. Was it true? She asked softly. He looked down, his fingers gripping the armrest of his chair. Some of it. Levin. Then tell me the rest, she said. His voice broke slightly. It was raining that night. My brother wanted to drive, but I insisted. I thought I could handle the road. When the car skidded, He stopped, closing his eyes. I froze. She reached for the wheel. She saved me and killed herself doing it. That is the truth I live with. Clara felt tears sting her eyes. That was not your fault. It was my arrogance, he said quietly. And arrogance always has a cost. Obba. She knelt beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. You have punished yourself long enough. He looked at her then, the coldness in his eyes cracking into something fragile. You think forgiveness changes anything? I think it changes everything, she said. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and handed her a folded envelope. These are the board documents Edward mentioned. He is trying to replace me. If he succeeds, the company will collapse. The employees, the charities, everything my mother built it, will all vanish. I cannot let that happen. Clara unfolded the papers, scanning the lines she did not fully understand. What can I do? Stay away from him, Leonard said firmly. He will use you if he can. Promise me that. She nodded. I promise. He exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just a little. Thank you. As she stood to leave, he said softly, Clara. She turned. Whatever he said about that night, remember that you asked for the truth, not the version that would make me look better. I did, she replied. And I still believe you are better than you think. When she left the library, the hallway felt colder. Edward's voice still echoed in her mind, tangled with Leonard's confession. Two versions of the same tragedy, one meant to destroy, the other to survive. Outside, the sea was dark with approaching rain. Somewhere deep inside the house, Clara heard the faint click of a door locking. She could not tell if it was Leonard securing his secrets again or Edward preparing to break them open. Either way, the storm had begun. Rain returned to the coast the following morning, heavy and relentless, turning the cliffs beneath the Voss mansion into sheets of glistening gray. The air smelled of salt and tension. Clara Hale awoke to the sound of distant thunder and the faint hum of conversation downstairs. When she stepped into the hall, she saw two reporters standing in the foyer, umbrellas dripping water onto the marble floor. The butler was trying to usher them out, his voice polite but firm. I am sorry, ma'am, he said quickly when he saw her. They came uninvited. It seems there has been a story published overnight. Clara felt her stomach tighten. What story? He hesitated. You should speak with Mr. Voss. She did not wait for an explanation. Her bare feet echoed against the floor as she made her way to Leonard's study. The door was already open. He sat behind the desk, one hand pressed against his forehead, a newspaper unfolded before him. The headline was impossible to miss. The Secret Wife of Leonard Voss. A marriage built on lies and money. Beneath it was a photograph of Clara at the gala, standing beside Leonard, smiling at the cameras. The article beneath told a cruel story, one of a desperate woman who had married a broken billionaire for his fortune, a woman who played the perfect wife for pity and gain. Her hands trembled as she read the words. Who would write this? Leonard did not look up. Someone who wanted to see us humiliated. Edward, she whispered. He nodded once, his jaw tight. He leaked your background to the press. The hospital bills, your sister's condition, even the payment arrangement. Everything. She sank into the chair opposite him, her heart pounding. They twisted it all. They made it sound like I used you. They will print whatever sells, Leonard said bitterly. Truth has never been their business. But this will ruin you, she said quietly. The board will turn on you. His eyes lifted to hers, sharp and weary. Do you think I care about the board? I think you care more than you admit, she said. This company is the only piece of your family you have left. He stared at her for a long moment, then looked away. Perhaps that is why it hurts so much to see it poisoned. By midday, the mansion was surrounded by photographers. Cameras flashed from behind the iron gates, shouting her name, demanding a statement. Clara stayed inside, blinds drawn, heart pounding each time a shadow moved past the window. The staff avoided eye contact, though Maria quietly slipped tea into her room without a word. When Leonard appeared at her door that evening, he looked older, his expression carved from fatigue. You should not read any more of it, he said gently. The noise will fade. It always does. Clara shook her head. It will not fade if we stay silent. What would you have me do? He asked. Tell them the truth that I married you to save myself from loneliness? That I let you think I was paralyzed to escape guilt? Her voice rose, trembling. Then at least tell them I am not a liar. Oh. He flinched at her tone but said nothing. The rain drummed against the windows like fingers on glass. I can leave if that will make it easier, she said after a moment. He looked up sharply. No. Leonard. No, he repeated. Leaving would only give them what they want. They want to see us break. They want to prove we were never real. Her eyes softened. Then what are we? He hesitated, the silence between them deep and heavy. We are something I did not plan for, he said finally. The words should have comforted her, but instead they left her hollow. Later that night, she stood alone in the library, staring at the reflection of rain streaking the windows. The newspaper lay folded on the table beside her, its ugly words still visible beneath the lamplight. She picked it up and tore it into pieces, one slow rip at a time, as if destroying the paper might erase the shame it carried. Behind her, the door opened quietly. Leonard entered, wearing a dark coat, his hair damp from the rain. The board is calling for an emergency meeting tomorrow, he said. Edward is pushing for a vote of removal. She turned to him. Can they do that? If he convinces enough members, yes. What will you do? He met her eyes. Fight. She nodded slowly. Then I will fight with you. He shook his head. You have already suffered enough because of me. This is not about blame anymore, she said. It is about truth. If you want people to see who you really are, you have to stop hiding. His gaze held hers for a long moment. You sound like my mother, he said quietly. She must have been wise, Clara replied. He smiled faintly. She was relentless. Outside, lightning flashed over the ocean, illuminating the cliffs for a brief, brilliant second. Then darkness swallowed the world again. When Leonard finally spoke, his voice was steady. Tomorrow, they will ask for blood. I intend to give them truth instead. Clara stepped closer, her hand brushing his sleeve. Then tell them everything, even the parts that hurt. He nodded once, the faintest tremor in his breath. And if I fall? She met his gaze with quiet strength. Then I will stand for you. The rain continued through the night, washing the city in silver. And somewhere between the crash of thunder and the hush of wind, Clara realized that her fear was no longer for herself. It was for him, the man who had built his walls out of guilt and was finally brave enough to tear them down. The next morning arrived without sunlight. The clouds hung low over the bay, and the mansion seemed to breathe in silence, every wall tense with expectation. Clara Hale awoke before dawn, unable to rest. She dressed simply and stood by the window, watching the restless sea. Today would decide everything. The company, their names, perhaps even their marriage. Downstairs, she found Leonard Voss in the foyer, already prepared to leave. He wore a dark suit, his tie perfectly knotted, his expression unreadable. The rain had eased, leaving a thin mist over the driveway. You should not come with me, he said quietly when he saw her. I am your wife, she replied. I will not hide while they tear you apart. He hesitated, eyes softening for a brief moment. This meeting will not be pleasant. I have lived through worse, she said. The car ride into the city was long and silent. The rain returned halfway there, turning the windows into rivers of gray. Leonard sat beside her, hands folded, gaze fixed on the blurred skyline. Clara wanted to reach for him, to offer something comfort, strength, maybe just warmth, but she did not know if he would accept it. When they arrived at the glass tower that housed the Voss Industries headquarters, photographers were already waiting. Flashes of light burst through the storm as the car pulled up to the curb. Questions flew through the air like arrows. Mr. Voss, is it true your wife was paid to marry you? Mrs. Voss, were you aware of your husband's condition before the wedding? Is the company being transferred to your cousin? Leonard stepped out first, his composure unshaken. He ignored the chaos, moving through the sea of cameras with quiet dignity. Clara followed, her chin lifted, every step measured. The security guards led them through the crowd and into the elevator. On the top floor, the boardroom was waiting. 12 men and women sat around the long glass table. Edward Voss stood near the head of it, dressed impeccably, his smile polished. Leonard, Edward said smoothly, I was beginning to think you would not show. I would not want to miss my own execution, Leonard replied evenly. Edward's smile widened. Then let us begin. The meeting stretched for hours. Edward presented his case, with the confidence of a man who believed victory was already his. He spoke of declining investor trust, questionable management, and public scandal. Each word was like a needle, designed to draw blood. The board members listened in silence, their faces carved in polite neutrality. When it was Leonard's turn, he rose from his chair. For a heartbeat, Clara thought she saw him struggle, the muscles in his legs tensing beneath the table. Then, slowly and deliberately, he stood. Gasps filled the room. He did not lean on the chair for balance. His voice, when he spoke, was steady. "You have all seen headlines, half-truths and rumors. You have been told that I am a man too weak to lead, that I built my company on sympathy and lies. But weakness is not defined by what the world sees. It is defined by what we choose to believe about ourselves." He walked to the end of the table, his steps slow but sure. "I spent 2 years hiding behind this chair because I believed I did not deserve to stand. I believed I had lost everything that mattered, but what I lost was not my legs. It was my courage. Today, I am taking it back." The room was silent except for the faint hum of the rain against the glass. Edward's expression had frozen into disbelief. Leonard continued, "My wife did not marry me for money. She married me because I asked her to, and because she needed help when no one else offered it. I made her a promise, and I intend to keep it. Whatever this company becomes, it will be built on truth, not deception." He turned toward Edward. "You wanted to expose me, cousin. Consider it done. I am not paralyzed. I never was. I chose to stay seated because I could not bear to walk in a world where I had caused so much harm. But shame is not a legacy, and guilt is not leadership." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then one of the board members cleared his throat. "Mr. Voss, if what you say is true, then the accusations against you are irrelevant," Leonard interrupted gently, "because they were meant to destroy a man who no longer exists." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but she held them back. Edward, recovering from shock, stepped forward. "You think this performance will save you? The damage is already done. The shareholders will never trust you again." Leonard met his gaze calmly. "Trust is not built overnight, but neither is betrayal. And I think they will remember which Voss spent his life building, and which one spent it taking." Edward's smile cracked. "You will regret this." "I already have," Leonard said. When the meeting ended, the board members filed out one by one, murmuring among themselves. Some nodded respectfully to Leonard as they passed. Edward left last, his jaw tight, his pride burning behind his silence. Outside, the storm had finally broken. The sky over the bay glowed pale silver. Leonard stood by the window, his reflection blending with the clouds. Clara approached quietly. "You stood," she said softly. He nodded once. "I had to." "Because of them?" she asked. He turned to her, his eyes tired but alive. "Because of you." She reached for his hand, and for the first time since their marriage began, he did not pull away. The warmth of his fingers was steady, human, and real. For a brief moment, the world outside disappeared, leaving only the quiet truth between them, the man who had learned to stand again, and the woman who had taught him how. The rain had stopped by the time Leonard Voss and Clara Hale left the glass tower. The air outside was cool, washed clean by the storm. Reporters still lingered near the entrance, but this time their questions came softer, hesitant, uncertain. The image of Leonard standing before the board had already begun to circulate online, changing the narrative faster than any headline could control. As their car pulled away, Clara watched the reflection of the city lights move across the window. The tension in her chest began to ease for the first time in days. Leonard sat beside her, silent, his posture calm but weary. His hands rested on his knees, his expression distant, as though he were still standing in that boardroom, facing down ghosts. When they arrived back at the mansion, the world felt strangely different. The storm clouds had drifted out to sea, leaving the horizon streaked with pale gold. The air smelled of wet stone and roses. Maria met them at the door, relief flickering in her tired eyes. "It is good to have you home, Mr. Voss," she said softly. "There has been too much silence in this house." Leonard gave her a faint smile. "Silence can be useful, Maria. It teaches us what to listen for." That night, the mansion was quiet once more, but not with fear. Clara walked the long hallway toward her room, her bare feet brushing against the cool marble. She paused outside Leonard's study, the door slightly open, light spilling onto the floor. He sat inside, his chair turned toward the window, the faint glow of the fireplace painting his face in amber light. She hesitated, then stepped inside. "You should rest," she said gently. He looked up at her, eyes softer than she had ever seen them. "So should you." She walked closer, her hands clasped in front of her. "What happens now?" Leonard exhaled slowly. "Now, I repair what is left. The company, the foundation, the name. It will not be easy." "It does not have to be easy," she said. "It only has to be honest." He smiled faintly. "Honest? I have spent so long running from that word." Clara sat across from him, watching the fire flicker between them. "You faced them today. You faced him. That is more than honesty, it is courage." Leonard looked into the fire for a long time before speaking. "Courage feels different than I remembered. It is quieter." "Quiet is good," she said. "It means you survived." He met her eyes then, his voice low. "Do you regret marrying me, Clara?" The question hung in the air like smoke. She thought of the day she first walked into this house, desperate and frightened, believing she had made a deal with a stranger. She thought of the silence, the secrets, the pain, and the moments in between that had slowly become something more. "No," she said finally. "I do not regret it." He studied her face, searching for doubt. "Even after everything you have learned?" "Especially after everything I have learned," she said softly, "because now I know who you really are." For a long time, neither spoke. The fire crackled, throwing patterns of light across the room. Then Leonard said quietly, "You should know, Edward is not finished. He will not stop until he has taken everything he can." Clara's expression tightened. "Then we will not let him." He raised an eyebrow. "We?" She smiled slightly. "You may be the one with the name, Mr. Voss, but you are not the only one with fight." He laughed quietly, the sound raw but genuine. "You have a strange way of giving comfort." "I am not here to comfort you," she replied. "I am here to remind you that you are still alive." Leonard looked at her for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them, gratitude, perhaps, or something deeper. "You have a way of saying things that make me forget the world," he said softly. "Then maybe you should forget it for one night," she answered. The words lingered in the air. He turned back toward the fire, his voice barely above a whisper. "It has been a long time since I felt like I could." Clara rose slowly. "Then start small. Rest." She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, his voice stopped her. "Clara." She looked back. "Thank you," he said, "for standing beside me when you had every reason not to." She smiled faintly. "You are welcome, Leonard." For the first time, he let her see the weight lift from his shoulders, not entirely, but enough to let the light in. That night, Clara stood by her window, looking out at the cliffs. The sea was calm now, the moon rising over the water like a promise. Somewhere below, she could hear the faint hum of the piano again. The same melody as before, slow, uncertain, but alive. She closed her eyes and listened. Each note carried a story. Of loss, of guilt, of forgiveness. And beneath it all, she heard something she had not heard before: hope. Downstairs, Leonard sat at the piano, his fingers trembling slightly against the keys. He was not playing for memory this time. He was playing for the present, for the woman who had seen through the silence, for the life he thought he had buried, for the chance to begin again. The house, once heavy with secrets, began to feel alive. And for the first time since the day his mother died, Leonard Voss allowed himself to believe that redemption was not something he had to earn. It was something he had been given quietly, freely, by the one person who refused to leave. Outside, the sea shimmered under the moonlight, endless and patient, as if waiting to carry them both toward something new. The next morning dawned pale and quiet, the sea outside the mansion shimmering beneath a thin layer of fog. Clara Hale awoke to the scent of coffee drifting through the corridor and the soft clinking of silverware in the kitchen below. For the first time in months, the air did not feel heavy. It felt alive, touched by the smallest trace of peace. When she entered the dining room, Leonard Voss was already there, seated near the tall windows with a newspaper folded neatly beside his plate. He looked up as she approached, a faint smile touching his lips. "Good morning," he said. His voice was softer than usual, free of the edge it once carried. "Good morning," she replied. "You are up early." "Old habits," he said, pouring her a cup of tea. "And the storm kept me restless. It seems I am not built for stillness anymore." She sat across from him, noticing the way the light fell across his face. There were lines of exhaustion still, but beneath them was something new, resolve. The kind that comes after surviving a storm, not before it. The silence between them was comfortable for a moment, filled only by the quiet ticking of the clock. Then Leonard said, "I received a call from the board this morning. They want to issue a statement clearing my name, publicly." Clara looked up. "That is good news." "It is necessary," he said, though there was little triumph in his tone. "Edward is still out there, and he will not stop until he finds another way in. But at least now, the world knows the truth." Clara nodded slowly. "The truth has a way of surviving, even when people try to bury it." He studied her for a moment, then said, "You speak like someone who has known a great deal of silence." "I have," she admitted quietly. "But silence teaches you how to listen." Leonard's smile faded into something gentler. "Then perhaps I should start listening more." After breakfast, she walked with him through the garden. The roses were blooming again, fragile and bright after the rain. Maria greeted them with her usual warm smile, handing Clara a pair of gardening shears. "These needed tending," Maria said softly. "They grow stronger when you cut away what is dead." Clara nodded, taking the shears, her eyes flicking toward Leonard. "Everything grows stronger when given a chance." He caught the meaning in her words but said nothing. Instead, he watched as she trimmed the wilted petals, her movements patient and precise. For the first time, he noticed how the morning light seemed to follow her, softening the coldness of the estate around them. When they returned inside, a message was waiting, a sealed envelope marked with Edward's handwriting. Leonard's expression darkened as he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a few neatly printed lines. "Enjoy your victory, cousin. But remember, the truth cuts both ways." Leonard folded the note carefully, his jaw tightening. Clara stepped closer. "What does it mean?" "It means he is planning something," Leonard said. "Something that will not end with business." She frowned. "You think he would hurt you?" "I think he already tried," Leonard said quietly. "He failed to destroy me in that boardroom. Now he will try another way." Clara placed a hand on his arm. "Then he will have to go through both of us." He looked at her hand, then at her face. "You should not have to fight my battles." "Oh? They became my battles the moment I said I do," she said simply. He stared at her for a long time, then let out a slow breath. "You have a way of saying things that make impossible choices seem bearable." "I learned that from you," she said softly. That evening, Leonard gathered his lawyers and security team in the study. The air buzzed with quiet urgency as they reviewed documents, traced accounts, and prepared for the next move. Clara stayed by the window, listening, her thoughts circling the note Edward had sent. When the meeting ended, Leonard dismissed everyone except her. "You heard all of it," he said, his tone resigned. "There may be a time soon when it becomes dangerous to stay here." "I am not leaving," she said. "Clara, you asked me once if I regretted marrying you," she interrupted gently. "I said no then, and I will say no again now. Whatever comes next, I stay." "Oh," he studied her face, trying to read the certainty in her eyes. "You do not know what he is capable of." "Neither does he know what we are capable of," she replied. The words lingered in the air. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Leonard crossed the room, his steps slow but steady, no longer hiding the strength in his legs. He stopped beside her at the window, the reflection of the sea shimmering faintly between them. "When this is over," he said quietly, "I do not know what will remain of the company. Perhaps nothing, perhaps everything, but I want you to know that whatever happens, you have given me back something I thought was gone." She turned toward him. "What is that?" "Belief," he said simply. The words struck her deeper than she expected. For months she had seen him as a man built of stone, strong, unyielding, unreachable. But now, standing beside him, she saw the truth. Leonard Voss was not made of stone. He was made of scar tissue and hope, stitched together by grief and love. Outside, the sea wind rose again, brushing through the open windows. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled a low warning of another storm. But this time, neither of them turned away from it. Clara rested her hand lightly against the window pane. "Then we face whatever comes," she said. "Together." Leonard looked at her, and for the first time in years, the quiet resolve in his eyes carried no sorrow, only faith. "Together," he said. The waves crashed against the cliffs below, steady and certain. And as the storm clouds began to gather once more on the horizon, the house on the hill no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a promise kept alive. The night deepened until the mansion felt like an island adrift in wind and thunder. Rain lashed against the tall windows, and every flash of lightning carved the hallways in harsh silver light. Clara Hale stood near Leonard Voss's study, her pulse quick and unsteady. The message Edward had left burned in her mind like an open wound. "Tonight, I take everything from you." Leonard paced the floor, his expression sharp and focused. His voice remained calm, but his movements betrayed urgency. "The security team is checking the grounds," he said. "Every gate, every corridor. He will not get far if he tries anything." Clara looked at the letter still clenched in his hand. "He already got this inside," she said quietly. "That means someone let him in." Leonard's gaze lifted to her. "Yes, and that means he is not alone." A clap of thunder cracked through the air, shaking the windows. The lights flickered, then steadied again. Maria appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Mr. Voss, the guards found a car parked near the lower gate. The engine is still warm, but no one is there." Leonard nodded grimly. "Lock every entrance. Tell the staff to stay in their quarters." Maria hesitated, her eyes darting to Clara. "Be careful, sir." Then she left, closing the door behind her. The study felt colder now. The wind howled against the glass like a living thing. Clara crossed the room and touched Leonard's arm. "You should leave, at least until morning. Let the police handle this." He shook his head. "If I run now, he wins again. I am done running from him." She searched his face, seeing the steel in his eyes. "Then we face him together." He looked at her, the faintest trace of a smile crossing his lips. "You are not afraid, are you?" "I am," she said honestly. "But fear is not enough reason to leave." Before he could respond, the power went out. The lights blinked once, twice, and then darkness swallowed the room. The hum of electricity died, leaving only the rain and the sound of the sea. Leonard moved instantly, opening a drawer and retrieving a small flashlight. The narrow beam cut through the dark. "The generator should have kicked in," he muttered. Clara's voice trembled slightly. "What if he cut it?" He met her gaze in the dim light. "Then he is already inside." They made their way into the corridor, the beam of light slicing through the shadows. The air smelled of damp stone and sea salt. The mansion, once familiar, now felt strange, its long hallways stretching endlessly into dark corners. Halfway to the main staircase, a sound broke the silence, a door creaking. Slow, deliberate. Leonard raised the light. "Who is there?" No answer. Then came the faint echo of footsteps. Clara gripped his arm. "Leonard." He placed a finger to his lips, listening. The footsteps grew louder, closer, then stopped. From the darkness at the far end of the hall came a voice, smooth and cold. "You always did like to make an entrance, cousin." The beam of light caught Edward Voss as he stepped into view. His coat was soaked from the rain, his hair plastered against his forehead. He looked calm, almost amused. "Put the flashlight down," Edward said. "You are blinding me." Leonard did not move. "You broke into my home." "Your home?" Edward laughed quietly. "Everything here was mine before it was yours. I am only taking back what was stolen." "Oh, you lost your right to this family the day you betrayed it," Leonard said. Edward stepped closer, his voice rising. "You betrayed it. You destroyed our name, our mother's memory, everything she built. You made the world pity us." Lightning flashed through the windows, illuminating his face wild, furious, trembling with rage. Clara stepped forward, her voice steady. "This is not the way, Edward. You can still stop." He turned to her, his expression twisting. "You should have stayed out of this. You married him for his name, just like everyone else wanted to." "I married him because he still had something you never did," she said. "Honor." Edward's jaw tightened. "You think you know him? You think you see a savior? He killed his own family." Leonard's voice cut through the air, sharp and cold. "Enough." Edward reached into his coat and pulled out a folder, tossing it onto the floor. Papers scattered across the marble. Evidence, he said. Emails, transactions, proof that you used company funds to cover up your mistake. Leonard looked at the papers without flinching. Forgeries, just like the rest of your life. Edward's hand clenched. You think anyone will believe you? They already do, Leonard said. You have no more control. For a moment, neither spoke. The storm outside grew louder, waves crashing against the cliffs. Then Edward's composure cracked. He lunged forward, grabbing Leonard by the collar. Clara gasped, rushing between them. Stop, she cried. This is not who you are. Edward froze, breathing hard. His eyes flicked between her and Leonard. And for the briefest instant, something human flickered there. Regret, maybe, or confusion. Then he shoved Leonard back and stumbled away. You will regret this, Edward hissed. Both of you. He turned and ran down the hall, disappearing into the shadows. The front door slammed, seconds later. The silence that followed was unbearable. Only the sound of rain filled the air. Leonard steadied himself, his voice low. It is over. Clara shook her head. No, he will not stop until he destroys himself, or you. Leonard looked toward the doorway where Edward had vanished, his jaw tight. Then I will make sure he cannot hurt anyone else. Clara stepped closer, her hand finding his. Do not become what he is. He looked at her, the stormlight glinting in his eyes. I will not. But I will end this. Outside, the thunder roared again, rolling over the cliffs like the voice of something ancient and final. Inside the mansion, Leonard Voss stood in the dim light, a man who had run from guilt for too long, now preparing to face it one last time. The storm did not end that night. It carried into morning, relentless and gray, washing the cliffs in mist. The mansion stood against it like an old fortress, its windows glowing faintly in the half-light. Inside, the house was still, but not peaceful. The events of the night clung to the air, like smoke. Clara Hale had not slept. She sat in the library, wrapped in a shawl, listening to the rain. Every sound made her flinch: the creak of the old wood, the hum of the wind through the chimney. Edward's words replayed in her mind. You killed your own family. She wanted to believe they were lies, but doubt has a way of creeping into the smallest cracks of truth. When Leonard Voss entered the room, she turned toward him. His hair was damp, his shirt untucked, but his posture was composed. He looked like a man who had faced too many dawns that offered no peace. He is gone, he said quietly. The guards searched the grounds at first light. The car is gone too. Clara exhaled, though relief did not come. He will come back. Leonard nodded once. Yes, but next time, I will be ready. She studied him for a moment. What does that mean? It means I am done waiting for him to destroy everything I love, he said. I will not hide behind these walls anymore. It is time the world knows what he has done. He walked to the desk, spreading the papers Edward had dropped across the polished surface. Half of this is forged, he said. But there are pieces of truth hidden in the lies, enough to twist the story if he gives them to the press. Clara stepped closer. Then you must tell your story before he tells his. Leonard looked up at her. Do you trust me to do that? She held his gaze. I do. He nodded, the faintest trace of warmth flickering through his eyes. Then we end this on our terms. Later that morning, Leonard called his legal team and his publicist. The mansion filled with quiet urgency once again. Phones rang, printers hummed. Staff hurried through the corridors carrying folders and statements. It was as if the house itself had awakened to fight alongside him. By afternoon, the plan was set. A press conference would be held at the Foundation headquarters in the city. Leonard would speak publicly about the company, his accident, and the truth of his relationship with Clara. The world would finally hear his voice without distortion. Clara watched him from across the room as he rehearsed his statement. His words were calm and measured, but there was emotion behind them, truth drawn from scars. When he looked up and caught her watching, he said softly, Do I sound like a man worth believing? Yes, she said. You sound like a man who has stopped hiding. He smiled faintly. That might be the first honest compliment I have ever earned. Evening came too soon. The rain lightened to a drizzle, but the sky remained heavy with clouds. They left the mansion just before sunset, the car cutting through the wet roads toward the city. The silence between them was filled with unspoken thoughts. At the foundation building, cameras waited. Dozens of reporters gathered under umbrellas, their faces lit by the glow of camera flashes. Security guided Leonard and Clara through the crowd and into the lobby. Inside the press hall, the noise quieted as Leonard stepped to the podium. Clara stood just behind him, her hands clasped together, her heart pounding. He looked out over the sea of faces and began to speak. "For many years," he said, "I have lived with a lie, not the kind that fools others, but the kind that poisons the soul. After my accident, I chose to let the world believe I was broken. I told myself it was punishment, that I deserved my pain. But truth, as I have learned, does not stay buried forever. It finds its way to light, no matter how deep we hide it. Zir." He paused, his eyes sweeping across the room. "My cousin, Edward Voss, has accused me of crimes financial, personal, moral. Some of you have seen the headlines. Some of you have already judged me. But here is the truth. The only thing I am guilty of is surviving when others did not." A hush filled the room. The rain outside beat softly against the glass. He continued, "The woman standing behind me is not my weakness. She is my witness. She saw the man I was and refused to let me remain him. You have all called her names: opportunist, gold digger, pretender, but she is none of those things. She is the reason I am standing here today." Clara's throat tightened. She tried not to cry. Leonard's voice deepened, steady but full of quiet fire. "Edward Voss has spent his life chasing power. I have spent mine running from it. Today, I stop running. Today, I reclaim the name my mother gave honor to, not for wealth, but for truth." The cameras flashed like lightning, but he did not flinch. He finished with one final line. "And if this truth costs me everything, so be it. At least it will be mine." The room erupted in questions. Voices rose, cameras clicked, flashes filled the air. Leonard turned, meeting Clara's eyes. She saw the exhaustion there, but also peace. As they left the stage, one reporter shouted after them, "Mr. Voss, what happens now?" Leonard paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Now," he said quietly, "we begin again." Outside, the storm had finally broken. The clouds thinned, revealing the first trace of dawn light on the horizon. In the car, Clara reached for his hand. "You did it," she whispered. Leonard looked out the window at the city that had once worshipped and then condemned him. "No," he said softly, "we did it." Oh, and as they drove away from the flashing lights and the noise, the world behind them seemed to fade, replaced by the sound of rain easing into silence, the sound of a man who had finally told the truth and a woman who had taught him how to live with it. The morning after the press conference arrived, with a kind of fragile calm. For the first time in months, the headlines carried no venom. The papers did not question or accuse. They simply reported, "Leonard Voss stands and speaks the truth." The photographs showed him at the podium, standing without the wheelchair that had once defined him. To the public, it was redemption. To him, it was release. Clara Hale read the articles in silence as sunlight poured into the breakfast room. The mansion felt lighter, as if every hidden corner had finally exhaled. Maria brought in a tray of tea and fruit, her eyes bright with pride. "You should be proud, Mrs. Voss," she said warmly. "He told the truth, and the world believed him." "Oh," Clara smiled faintly. "I am proud, but I know this is not the end." Maria hesitated. "You think Edward will try again?" Clara looked out the window at the restless sea. "I think men like Edward never stop until they destroy something, or until they are destroyed." Later that morning, Leonard joined her. He looked tired, but there was color in his face again, a quiet strength in his step. "You did not have to face those reporters with me," he said as he poured himself coffee. "I told you before," she replied softly. "We face things together." He smiled, a genuine one this time. "Then we should get used to this calm. It might not last long." It did not. By noon, Leonard's lawyer called with urgent news. Edward had vanished from his hotel after transferring several large sums from an offshore account. There were also reports of an accident on the coastal road hours earlier. A car matching Edward's had gone off a cliff near the old bridge. The police had found the wreckage, but no body. Leonard set down the phone slowly, his expression unreadable. They think he is dead, he said. Clara felt her chest tighten. Do you believe that? He shook his head. Edward never disappears unless he wants to be found later. This feels like one last move. The rest of the day passed in uneasy silence. Rain began again by evening, a slow drizzle that blurred the horizon. Clara spent most of the afternoon in the library, trying to read, but her eyes refused to focus. She could not shake the feeling that something unfinished was moving toward them, something inevitable. At dusk, a knock sounded at the door. Maria entered, holding an envelope sealed with dark wax. It was on the front steps, she said, her voice trembling. No one saw who left it. Leonard took it from her, breaking the seal carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. You took my name, my company, and now my life. But one day, someone will ask you how you got them back. When they do, tell them it cost you your soul. There was no signature, but Leonard did not need one. Clara stepped closer, reading over his shoulder. He is alive, she said. Leonard folded the note, setting it on the desk. Yes, and this is his confession, or his curse, she said quietly. He looked up at her, his eyes tired but steady. Either way, it ends here. I will not let him take another breath of my peace. That night, the storm returned in full force. The sea crashed against the cliffs, and the wind howled through the corridors like a warning. Clara lay awake, listening to it, unable to rest. When she finally rose and went to the window, she saw movement on the grounds below, shadows shifting near the garden gate. Her heart pounded. She hurried down the hall and knocked on Leonard's door. There is someone outside, she said. He dressed quickly, pulling on his coat, and together they descended the grand staircase. The power flickered again, plunging the hall into alternating flashes of light and shadow. When they reached the garden, the air was cold and sharp. Rain soaked the gravel path, and the lanterns swayed in the wind. Leonard raised his flashlight, the beam cutting through the mist. Edward, he called into the storm. If you are here, end this now. No answer came, only the wind and the distant crash of waves. Then, faintly, a voice carried through the rain. You cannot end what you began, Leonard. Clara froze. The sound was unmistakable. It came from the edge of the cliffs. They followed the voice until they reached the stone railing that overlooked the ocean. There, through the mist, stood a man soaked, trembling, his eyes wild. Edward. His face was pale, his coat torn, but the same fierce arrogance still burned in his gaze. Leonard stepped forward. You should have stayed gone. Edward laughed, the sound brittle and broken. And let you have the last word? Never. You do not have to do this, Clara said, her voice trembling but firm. It is over. Over? Edward spat the word. It will never be over. You took everything that was mine. I took nothing, Leonard said. You lost it yourself. Edward's expression twisted. Then you can lose it too. He stepped back toward the edge, the wind whipping at his coat. The rain made the stones slick beneath his shoes. For a heartbeat, time froze. Edward, Leonard shouted, reaching out. But Edward only smiled, a hollow, defeated smile. You win, cousin. For now. And then he was gone, his silhouette swallowed by the fog and the sound of the crashing waves below. Clara screamed. Leonard reached the edge, his hands gripping the cold stone, but there was nothing to see, only darkness and sea. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Leonard turned to her, rain streaming down his face. It is done, he said, his voice shaking. It has to be. Clara stepped closer, her hand finding his. Then let it be done, she whispered. They stood together on the cliff as the storm raged around them, two figures against the vast and merciless sea. For the first time, there was no pretense, no guilt, no lies, only truth, raw and unvarnished. And when dawn finally came, pale and cold, the mansion behind them no longer looked haunted. It looked like a place where something might finally begin again. The morning after the storm was clear and strangely still. The cliffs that had roared all night now stood silent, washed clean by rain. Mist lingered over the sea, curling around the rocks like soft breath. The Voss mansion, once heavy with tension and memory, gleamed in the sunlight as if the storm had never touched it. But inside, The air carried the echo of what had happened, the ending of a story that had begun in lies and finished in truth. Clara Hale stood on the balcony, wrapped in Leonard's coat. The sea breeze lifted strands of her hair as she stared toward the horizon. There was no sign of Edward's body. The search team had found only the remains of the broken railing and pieces of his coat caught in the rocks below. The official report called it an accident. Leonard did not correct them. Some truths were best left in silence. When Leonard stepped out beside her, the morning light caught the faint shadows beneath his eyes. He looked older, not in body, but in the way people do when they have finally laid their ghosts to rest. "They called again," he said quietly. "The police want me to come in and sign the final statement." Clara turned to him. "And you will?" He nodded. "Yes. It is time to close this." She studied his face for a long moment, the way the wind brushed across the lines of his jaw, the steadiness that had returned to his posture. "You look different," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "So do you." They stood in silence for a moment, the sea stretching endlessly before them. Then he said, "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" "For believing in me when I could not believe in myself." Clara's voice was gentle, but firm. "That is what love is. It is not about rescuing someone. It is about standing beside them until they learn how to rescue themselves." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and the quiet emotion in his eyes said everything words could not. "You gave me my life back," he said. "I do not know how to repay that." "You already have," she said, "by finally living it." Later that afternoon, they drove into the city. Reporters still hovered near the foundation building, but their tone was different now, curious, not cruel. Leonard spoke briefly to the authorities, signed the necessary papers, and offered no additional statement. When asked if Edward's disappearance would affect the company, he replied simply, "The company will move forward with integrity. That is all anyone needs to know." On the way back to the mansion, the road along the cliffs gleamed in sunlight. The ocean stretched calm and silver, the kind of peace that comes only after chaos. Clara rested her hand over his, feeling the quiet strength in his grip. When they reached home, Maria met them at the door with tears in her eyes. "The staff are so relieved," she said softly. "It feels like the house can breathe again." Leonard smiled at her. "So can we." That evening, the two of them walked through the garden together. The roses had survived the storm, their petals jeweled with droplets of water. The scent of salt and flowers filled the air. "Do you think it is really over?" Clara asked quietly. Leonard stopped beside the fountain, looking at the water rippling under the fading light. "Yes," he said. "Not because the pain is gone, but because it no longer controls me." She nodded, understanding. "And what will you do now?" He thought for a moment, then said, "Live, properly this time, without pretending, without guilt." He looked at her and smiled. "And you?" "I will stay," she said simply, "because this time it is not out of duty or debt. It is because I choose to." He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Then maybe this was never a contract after all," he said quietly. "No," she said, her voice steady. "It was a beginning disguised as one." The last light of sunset washed across the garden, turning the sea gold. The world felt wide again, full of possibility. Inside the mansion, the piano waited. Leonard sat before it, his hands hovering over the keys. Clara stood nearby, watching as he began to play the same melody she had heard months ago on that first night, when she believed she had married a broken man. But now, the notes were different. The same song, yet no longer burdened by sorrow. It was alive, steady, and full of quiet triumph. When he finished, he looked up at her and said softly, "You know, when I first asked you to marry me, I thought I was saving myself. I see now it was you who saved me." Clara smiled. "No, Leonard, you saved yourself. I just refused to let you forget who you were." He reached for her hand again. And together they stood by the piano as the last traces of sunlight slipped below the horizon. Outside, the waves broke softly against the cliffs, no longer violent, no longer threatening, just the endless rhythm of life continuing forward. In that moment, neither of them needed promises or declarations. The storm was gone. The ghosts had been buried. What remained was something simple and real, two people who had learned that love, at its truest, is not born from perfection, but from perseverance. As the night settled over the mansion, Leonard turned to her and said quietly, let us begin again." Clara's smile was gentle, certain. "Yes," she said. "Let us." And for the first time since the story began, the house on the cliffs was filled not with secrets or silence, but with laughter, the sound of healing, of forgiveness, of love made real, at last. The ocean carried the sound away into the dark, as if promising that no storm, no shadow, and no lie could ever undo what they had built together. The story that began with a contract had ended with a choice, and that choice, quietly and completely, was love.